I'm Steve Scott. Forensic science is a witness from beyond the grave in many police investigations. It's those minute telltale signs that can point the finger of guilt. In fact, many murderers have been brought to justice through pioneering work by British scientists. Our forensics expertise is world-renowned, carved out over 100 years of scientific brilliance. Tonight, we look at two cases that helped shape that international reputation. It's wartime London, and the Blitz is tearing the fabric, but not the heart, out of the city. But despite the great spirit that unified a nation, the nightly bombing raids also gave cover to a dramatic rise in crime. And none shocked the nation more than the murder of 4 women in 6 days. They'd been stripped naked and their bodies horribly mutilated. The hunt was on for the Blackout Ripper. Scotland Yard's foremost forensic detective was brought in to crack the case. Tony Britton takes up the story.
It is late afternoon, and the people of London are preparing for the night. Everyone is anxious to get home before darkness falls, before our nightly visitors arrive.
If the police hadn't got to him, who knows how awful the toll might have been.
The dusk is deepening. Listening crews are posted all the way from the coast to London to pick up the drone of the German planes.
The total darkness turned him into a kind of werewolf.
Soon the nightly battle of London will be on. This has been a quiet day for us, but it won't be a quiet night.
Word just spread like wildfire. Some still risked going out on the streets, even though they'd heard there'd been these terrible murders and mutilations.
Now it's 8 o'clock.
Winter 1942. A dark shadow is cast over a devastated London. The Luftwaffe bombards the shattered skeleton of England's capital. Churchill's government is in crisis, and Singapore is about to fall to the Japanese. These are times of fear and darkness. But in the cold despair of February, another evil stalks London streets. The long shadow of one of Britain's worst serial killers. His vicious attacks recalled the evil deeds of another murderer, a Victorian. This killer of 1942 was to become known as the Blackout Ripper.
The idea behind the blackout was to stop German bombers recognizing where they were, and so all the lights and shutters and things, everything was put out, the street lights.
Central London was black, absolutely totally black. You really had to black out your windows so completely that the slightest crack couldn't be shown.
It was during these dark nights, and under the shadow of the bombing raids, that the killer first struck.
The first of the victims was a sort of respectable woman who in fact was dragged into an air raid shelter somewhere near Marylebone and strangled. There didn't seem to be any motive. She wasn't sexually assaulted, wasn't robbed.
The woman's body was identified by the police as Evelyn Hamilton, a pharmacist in her 40s. She had been strangled, and scattered around lay the contents of what was assumed to be her missing handbag. To many detectives on the scene, there might appear to have been no leads. One man, however, was sharper than most, a rising star from Scotland Yard.
The great chap at the time was Cheryl, Fred Cheryl, Cheryl of the Yard, who solved any number of crimes because he was an incredible fingerprint expert.
Head of the fingerprint department, Chief Superintendent Cheryl was known throughout the force as the fingerprint man. Using his skills, he quickly deduced from the bruising on the victim's throat that the killer was left-handed. He recorded his thoughts on the case in his autobiography. What interested me most were marks on the victim's throat. In the dim light of the shelter, they appeared to have been made by the fingers of the murderer. From their position, I rapidly made another deduction and said to myself, this seems to have been a left-handed job. As the slaughter in the war continued, the murder at first received scant attention in the press. No one could have guessed there was a psychopath on the loose.
I think if you look at newspapers before and after the war, these would have been the headlines, but of course everything took second position to what was happening during the Battle of Britain and things like this. So there was a certain local interest, but also the newspapers were short of paper itself, so they were limited to what they could print, and most people were still interested in the war.
In fact, another body in the bloody carnage of war was hardly worth a headline.
Death was common in the big cities, in London and on the streets, so there wouldn't have been as much interest shown by people coming across a body as there would during peacetime. In nearly every street there would be friends or relations or friends of friends who would have been injured or died in a bombing raid, and so I think there was a live for the day attitude.
All this was about to change when the police found another body.
The second one was a woman who'd actually been on the stage, had become a prostitute, and who was found badly mutilated.
On arrival at number 153 Wardour Street, Soho, the police were confronted by a hideous and sickening crime. The body of former revue actress Evelyn Oatley lay naked on the bed. Having been brutally strangled, she had then had her throat cut, whilst the lower parts of her body had been savaged.
This man who killed by strangling, he actually mutilated the lower part of the woman.
Again, Cheryl was on the scene. It was only when one turned one's eyes to the bed that one realized the enormity of the crime which had been committed. Near the body of the dead woman lay a pair of curling tongs and a blood-stained tin opener. The latter was evidently the weapon with which the murderer had so wantonly mutilated his victim. It was here that Cheryl made another major discovery. Whilst examining the contents of the woman's handbag, he found a lady's hand mirror. After a minute examination of the room and its contents, I took possession of the tin opener and the piece of mirror. To me, these were very interesting exhibits, for upon that bit of looking glass I detected what I knew to be a thumbprint. I soon ascertained that it had not been made by the dead woman, and I assumed it had been made by the murderer when he was turning out the handbag. From the fingerprints on this mirror and the murder implement used to mutilate the woman's body, Fred Cheryl again deduced the murderer was left-handed.
Fingerprinting had been around for a pretty long time by then, and it had first been realized that everybody has completely individual fingerprints in the 1890s. Of course, no two people have the same fingerprint. There's simply no possibility at all.
Fingerprinting was started being used in the courts in, I think it was 1908, and so they had quite a good database. It all depended if the person had committed a crime before.
But the fingerprints were not on any police file. It was evidence, but not a lead.
It's, of course, far more difficult if they've got no previous convictions, there's no fingerprints, there's no police information or intelligence about the person.
Disturbing similarities were beginning to come to light between this criminal and one from the Victorian age, the sexual predator and serial killer Jack the Ripper.
The only victim that Jack the Ripper killed inside, Mary Kelly, he did a sort of similar job. He really took her apart and threw pieces of her around the room.
We think of sexual predators as a modern phenomenon. I think we've probably always had it. Perhaps we didn't recognize the concept of serial killers, so they might have been treated as independent cases, and only the most outstanding ones would come to light as serial killing.
What you've actually got here is a pretty sick person.
And a serial killer was a particularly hard breed of killer to catch.
They're very, very difficult for the police to solve because there's usually a motive, but with these people murdering complete strangers, they're very, very difficult to solve.
Evelyn Oatley had lived apart from her husband for some time. It seemed probable she had turned to prostitution during the hardship of the war years. Being a prostitute in the blackout could leave women exposed to the cruelest of predators.
At the start of the war, there was such a demand with soldiers and servicemen travelling the country that the supply started meeting the demand. There were more girls around, and when the Americans arrived, it was unbelievable. They were called affectionately Piccadilly Commandos and Hyde Park Rangers, and the difference was that the Rangers performed outdoors in the parks, and Piccadilly Commandos did it indoors.
I think there was more amateur activity as well, because people thought that life was very temporary.
Very, very dangerous jobs, very dangerous.
So, despite the dangers, women continued to walk the streets at night, and it wasn't long before a third would fall victim to the Blackout Ripper. Join me in a few moments.